Morning. It's good. Morning. I like that. We'll stretch that out a little bit today. It's good. It's good to see all of you here this morning. Hope you're doing well. Real quick, let me mention a date that I would like for you to put on the calendar. It can be one of these two dates, February 12th or February 13th. These are the nights that we're having what we call our celebration dinner. And it's the same thing each night, so it's not a two-night event necessarily, unless you want to come both nights, which is fine. But they're the same thing each night. And so here's the deal. If you're new or you've never been to a celebration dinner here, it's something that we've been doing for years in this church. And it's just an opportunity for us to gather together. We're going to eat together. We're going to fellowship together. We're going to worship together. And then we're going to spend some time looking back over this last year of ministry here at Cornerstone and all that God has done. And we're going to celebrate that. And then we're going to look ahead at what we believe God is calling us to do. And this year will be very special with that part because we're going to be talking about Dream 2020 and all the dreams that we've collected over this year from all of you and get a picture of what God is calling us to do and to be in the future. So we're going to be talking about that on this night. So again, February 12th, 13th, Jack Fisher will come up at the end and give you a little bit more detailed information about how you can connect with that. All right, if you're just dropping in with us, we're in a series called By Faith. And we're simply talking about this whole issue of faith and what does it mean and how do we live it out and how does it impact our life and what are some examples of faith. And we're looking at that quintessential chapter in the Bible from Hebrews 11 that really gives us a great picture, not just a definition, but a picture because it goes all the way back in the Bible, and it takes real examples of people who had to live out their faith, and some who lived it out in very difficult times and really had to rely and trust on the Lord. And so we get to kind of look back, and our faith is strengthened by watching how they live their life. And so that's what we're doing. Last week, Lee Cadden talked about Cain and Abel, which is always just such an interesting story. And you look at Abel's life and his faith and the way that he made his offering to God and the way that he trusted God in that, and God was pleased with that, and such an important lesson for us. And so that was kind of the first story in this long line of stories. And this morning we're going to get into another one, and we're going to be looking at a guy who had great faith and someone who walked with God for a very long time, and in that walking, he was shaped by that. So before we get into that, though, let me just simply ask you a question. Have you ever had somebody in your life that you maybe have walked with over time, and in that walking it out, you just found that you got to know them more over time? The more that you talked to them, the more that they shared stories with you, the more that they kind of opened their life to you, that you were shaped, maybe even influenced by them. Of course, that could be parents. I mean, it could be our spouse. It could be lots of people. But I'm even thinking people outside that immediate circle. Is there anybody else out there that really impacted you? And I've got several people that I could talk about this morning, but I always think about my grandparents. I only had one set that I grew up with, and that was on my mom's side, and that was Maxine and Charlie Beck. And I just loved my grandparents so much, and they were such a big influence in my life. My grandmother, Maxine, she was from the Midwest, grew up on a farm, and she was just the sweetest lady. I mean, I wish I could bring her up here because this woman didn't have a negative word to say about anybody, always had a smile on her face. Whenever she would see me or eventually my kids, she'd just clap her hands and say, "Oh!" And, that's always how everything started. She was extremely happy to see you, And I think even on bad days, she could pull that off and do a pretty good job of it. But this woman never had a driver's license, by the way. How about that? All her life, she never had a driver's license. And so you can tell that generation, But she was somebody, well, let me back up just a minute. They moved to Montgomery when I was 8 years old. And I can remember thinking, I just could barely grasp the concept that my grandparents were going to live in my neighborhood. I loved them so much. And I was like, are you kidding me? I can go there anytime I want to. And so what would happen is I would go there, especially during the summertime, I'd ride my bike down to my grandparents' house. And I would spend hours with them. And so as soon as I would get there, my grandmother, she would immediately ask me, all right, what do you want to eat? And let me just say this. You had a grandmother like this, I bet. Everything she made was homemade, from scratch. Nothing store-bought. She was not into that deal. So I had my options. So my two options when I was that age were either blueberry cobbler, because hers was the most heavenly blueberry cobbler I've ever had, or homemade macaroni and cheese. Or on a bonus day, I got both. And so she was just like, and it was like, it could be 10 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It didn't matter. She's going to make it for me. And so she would get in there and she would whip this stuff up, and I was just like, I love my grandmother. And also, this woman could play some cards. The little sweet Maxine, you better watch it, man. You get around a table with her, throw some cards out there, you're toast. And she played bridge all her life. I'm not sure, but I think maybe a little poker got thrown in there at some point. But anyway, she and I would play gin rummy, though. That was our game. And we would play with toothpicks. I learned to gamble from my grandmother. How about that? Yeah. But it wasn't like that. And but we would play gin rummy for hours. I mean, game on game on game. And, man, she would just waylay me every time. But every now and again, I beat her. And I remember one time I beat her. And it was just a glorious day and a big moment. I'll never forget that. And so I was done because we'd already played 10 games or something like that. And so I was like, thank goodness. I put all my cards aside. I was getting ready to go. And she goes, where are you going? And I was like, I thought we were done. And she goes, oh, no. Sit back down. We're going to play one more. And then she thrashed me. And then I thought, did she really just let me win, or did I actually win? Now I don't know. Anyway, but that was like our game of choice. And over those long card games, we got to know each other a lot. It's a lot of time talking. Lots of time talking. Well, that was my grandmother. My granddaddy, Charlie. If you can just picture John Wayne, if you're old enough to remember John Wayne, and kind of how he functioned and he's kind of a big guy and all that kind of stuff, that was my granddaddy. He so much reminded me of John Wayne, and just a big guy, kind of soft-spoken, hard worker, worked for Caterpillar all his life. He used to tell me stories about things like Caterpillar took him to Alaska to work on the Alaskan pipeline. And actually, while he was there working on the pipeline, he slipped on the ice and he broke his leg. And that was at the same time that my mom was getting married to my dad. And so in the wedding pictures that I used to look at on their wall is my granddaddy on crutches with a big old cast on because he'd slipped on the ice working on the pipeline, walking my mom down the aisle. And so I'd never forget that. Caterpillar took him to Vietnam. And he used to tell me about those experiences. So I used to love to sit and listen to my granddaddy, just talk about his days and what they were like and growing up and all this kind of stuff. And just big time being with them. And I can also remember, like, I would go spend the morning with them. And so there was a lot of, like, The Price is Right on TV. Lots of game shows. If you were there on Saturday night, it was the Lawrence Welk Show. Anybody remember that? I won that. And the two. Anyway, I really didn't enjoy that part of that moment. But anyway, we would watch those. They would eat lunch. And then they would both get in their matching recliners. And you know what's about to happen? Pull the blanket up. And it had the lever on the side. And before they pulled the lever, before they pulled the chute, they would look at me and they'd be like, are you good? And I'm like, I'm good. Whoosh! That went out. They both kicked back. And I mean, within a minute, the buzzsaw started, man. I mean, the snoring was incredible. And usually at this point, I would wait a minute until they were good and gone, and then I would go outside and play with my granddaddy's dangerous tools in his shed. So that's the way it was for me growing up. Good times. And they never knew that part, but it was funny. But, as I think about those moments with my grandparents and got to, lots of years with them, over the years, through all of this being together, conversations over the table, over the cards, doing whatever, I got to know them. And it's like over time, the more that we talked, the more they exposed their life to me, and the more I found that their life was shaping mine. Because I loved their kindness. I loved their hard work. I loved this. I loved that. That was really impacting me over time. And you know what? I mean, they were getting to know me. And they were getting to know all about me. And I'm convinced that if they'd never moved down and if we had just done this by phone and maybe a visit at Christmas, I don't think we would have had that same thing going on. But there was something about that closeness of being together over those years. And I think there's a lot that we can translate into our Christian life, our walk with God, if you will. In the very same way that, growing in our faith and really being shaped by the Lord requires us to walk with Him over time. And this guy that we're going to look at this morning, this story is a guy who did this well. So if you have your Bibles, We're going to be looking at verses 5 and 6 in this chapter 11 of Hebrews. And we're going to be looking at a guy named Enoch. And it's just an interesting name there. And really, we don't know a lot about Enoch, and we only have a few snapshots of his life, but apparently it was important enough to put in here. So here's what the writer says. It says, by faith, Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. And then he references Genesis chapter 5, where it says, he, Enoch, could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. So, a little bit about this guy Enoch. Enoch is the son of Jared, and we learn all this from Genesis 5. He was the father of Methuselah. You ever heard of that guy? Ever heard anybody say, old as Methuselah? It's because Methuselah was really old. Okay. And by the way, he had Methuselah when he was at the ripe young age of 65. So, just as you're getting your AARP card, you're having a child. Yeah. And he was also the great-grandfather of Noah. So, this is a little bit about Enoch. He lived 365 years. I mean, I've said this before, but gosh, at like 225, I'm thinking I'm done. I can't do this anymore. It's just God, can we stop? But he did, lived 365 years. Apparently during this period of time, people lived for lots of years like that. He was one of the what we call pre-flood patriarchs, people that we know about now and that we look back to. They're mentioned in the Bible. He's only mentioned in the Bible 4 times. He's mentioned in Genesis, Luke, Hebrews, and Jude. But he was known for his faith and his close relationship with God, and he's known because he did not die. Did you catch that? It says in Genesis 5:24, Enoch walked with God, then he was no more, because God took him away. In other words, it was as if one day in their walking together, God had his arm around Enoch and he said, let's walk in a different way today. And Enoch was like, sounds good to me. And they walked in this new direction, and at some point he took a step off of earth and he stepped into heaven. I got to tell you something. If I'm going to go, that's the way I'd like to go. I've already put in my request, by the way. It'd be nice to just skip the death part and just go straight in, just to take the step. And I think that what was happening here was that over this time together, that God and Enoch had developed such a relationship that it just seemed normal to just go from here to there. And we call that being translated, in that he didn't die an earthly death. He was just translated from earth to heaven, and that's what that's kind of all about. And in the same way, I think the writer included that in here because it's a reminder to us that if we have Christ in our life, guess what? We don't die either. Even though we may die an earthly death, and his body will die, our spirit never dies. And with our faith in him, that's how we get there. And that's one very important point he's trying to make. But what do we learn from the life of Enoch? Why is he even mentioned here when he's mentioned so little in other places, except that the writers who included him in Scripture knew something about Enoch's life, that they knew something about his faith, that they knew that he walked with God all of his life, and that was something that we needed to know about. It was something that was important and commendable and that should be imitated. And I think that's why it's included here. And again, back to that Genesis 5 passage, it says 2 times. Like in 3 verses, it says, Enoch walked with God. It goes on and talks about him having sons and daughters, and then it says again, Enoch walked with God. Like, you need to understand, this guy had a serious faith. He walked with God all of his life. And I think that phrase is just a great picture of what it means to have a relationship with God. To walk with him. It's kind of like every now and again, Becky and I get to take a walk together. And we go out, and for the first 2 or 3 minutes, there's not a lot of talk, because I'm huffing and puffing and trying to get used to the fact that we're walking, and everything. But then eventually, over time, as this walk goes on, we start talking more. And we start talking about things that matter. And by the end of the walk, we're always glad we did. So couples, be sure and do stuff like go walk. Anyway, not now, but later. But in that time, I realized that good things happen as we walk together. And I think that in the same way as we walk with God, and as we get to know him, that our faith is strengthened. it's kind of like two things happening. Our faith allows us to walk with God, and our walk with God strengthens our faith. And those two things are very important. Now, what does that mean for us today? How does Enoch impact us today? Except that we still have the same deal going on. And I think it's still possible to have a very deep and intimate relationship with God. So here's just a few thoughts as we think about this whole walking with God idea. Number one, I believe it means being close to God. I mean, practically that just makes sense. You can't walk with somebody that you're not close to. You can't be a mile apart and really be walking together, can you? Or walking in two different directions. And I think that what we're gaining here is that to walk with God implies being close to Him, and that God actually wants that to happen. In Psalms 145:18, he says this, "The Lord is near to all who call on Him, to all who call on Him in truth." And I really love that he used the word all. The Lord is near to all. And sometimes we might think, He sure doesn't want to be near to me because of what I've thought or said or done in my life. Surely He doesn't want to be close to me. He really wants to be close to Billy Graham. He's close to Billy. Surely He's close to him. He's just kind of somewhere watching me, though. But that's not what He's saying here. Everybody who calls on the Lord is right there immediately for you. No matter where you've been or what you've done, when you call on Him, He is near. Why? Because He wants to be. Because He chooses to be. Because He loves you. And in James 4:8, it says, "Come near to God, and He will come near to you." It's that implication of every time you take a step toward Him, He's taking a step towards you. And He's like, just come on, keep taking steps, because I'm going to keep coming. I think for Enoch, it says that God was pleased with Enoch. He was pleased with his faith. And I think that He was also pleased to be close to Him. Like He enjoyed that. And I think of it like, for me, when I travel and I'm away from Becky and the boys, when we talk on the phone, it's good, but it's not nearly as good as when I get back and I'm close to Becky and I'm close to the boys. I'm near them. It's just better. I'm pleased with that. I prefer that every time. And in the same way, God prefers that. Now, I know how this goes sometimes for us in reality, and I've done this before in my life for sure, is that we would rather do for God sometimes than be with Him. It's easier to do things for Him than to just be with Him. If I could just do some more works, then He'd be happy with me. And I think what God is saying, I think you're getting that backwards. I would just rather be with you first, and then let those good works flow out of that. And in that way, you'll do them all for the right reason anyway. Just be with me and watch what happens. Now, another idea, just as we talk about being close to Him, is something that we will choose to do, which is to be vulnerable with God, to be open with Him. And you might think, well, doesn't God already know everything about me? I mean, He is God, I mean, He already knows everything in my closet and all my stuff and my heart and everything else. And that may be true, but He still wants you to tell Him about it. He doesn't value the knowledge of what's going on. He values the relationship and that you're talking to Him. And that you trust Him enough to bring these things to Him and to be open with Him and to be vulnerable before Him. And I think about Enoch, you don't walk with God for 300 years and just shoot the breeze and talk about the weather. God, another great day that you made for me, At some point, you got to believe that it got down to some issues. Maybe one day he was like, God, Methuselah is driving me crazy. He's at that age of 200 that, is just so hard. I just can't take it anymore. I'm going to take his keys away, No more iPhone. That's it. Methuselah, you're grounded. I don't know. But you would think at some point that maybe they got down to some tough issues. that they actually communicated. And someone once said, the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. Married couples. The single biggest problem is that we assume it's taking place when it's really not. We think we're communicating well. And let me tell you something, in that case, men are from Mars and women are from Venus. Experts are telling us that. We just communicate and function at different levels. In fact, there are actually 5 levels of communication, right? Maybe you've heard of these. That every relationship needs to get to, especially marriage relationships. I'll just pick on married couples this morning. Number 1 level is a level of acquaintance. That's the one we blow through early on in the relationship. Hey, how you doing? How's it going? Having a good day? Great, bye. We can do that with a stranger. Level 2 is the sharing of information. Hey, how's it going? My name's Rusty. I'm married. I have 3 boys. I live in Auburn. I'm a pastor. There, now we've moved to another level. We've shared some information. Number 3 is the sharing of ideas. I believe this. I don't believe in that. I'm for this. I'm against that. Now we're beginning to share at another level. Now here's the deal. Those first 3 levels, we're all pretty good at. Even the men, even us. We can get to the first 3 pretty well. Now here we go, 4 and 5. 4 is when we share our emotions. I'm angry. I'm mad. I'm excited. I'm happy. I'm upset. I'm discouraged. I love you. I care about you. This is a whole nother level. But it's one that we should get to. And then there's level 5, which there's just no other way to say this, but gut level conversation. This is where we share something with somebody else that when they own the information, you can think about it like this, they have, see, that's so scary. I know, I'm sorry. And we'll get right through it. But when you share with somebody at this level, you're giving them information that might even give them power over you because they know it. Because you've been vulnerable. You shared something that you struggle with. You confessed something. You know, you shared something at that level because you needed to share it because you're looking for help. You're looking for that other person to come alongside you in that moment. And now, to be clear about this, couples, we don't do gut level conversation every day all the time. That could wear you out, all right? We get that, although that is something that at some point requires it and we should be willing to share. But and it's just so funny because to hear experts talk about this, it's like, ladies, you're so good at 4 and 5. For the most part, I don't want to stereotype everybody, but most ladies are really good at emotional conversation and even getting to a level of gut level sharing. The problem happens, though, is when your expectations for your husband are that they should be at the same place you are with that. Ooh, let's do some marriage therapy here this morning. And you're like, how come you never share? Because I want a donut. You know, I mean, you know, I'm sorry. And I get a lot of response by that. But, and then there's, come on. So then there's the guys, and I am one of you, and we don't want to go there in general, as a rule. Some guys are good at that, but for the most part, you know, we're good with 1, 2, and 3. We can share information all day. I can even share some ideas with you. I can even tell you how to do something. And I might even tell you how to do something. But it's really bad after your wife has shared it at a deep level and you tell her how to do something. Or she just wants to share with you and you tell her how to fix it. Come on. Anyway, this is not marital therapy and we're talking about Enoch. But this is so good right now, I just want to live in the moment. All right, the whole point is, God also wants us to get through those levels of conversation and really down to the issues. And that's what he loves. He just wants to be with you and me. In that same way that he was able to be with Enoch. And then this just kind of a last thought here that really what we're talking about here is being on a path towards spiritual maturity. Just question ourselves, are we on a path towards spiritual maturity where we're getting to the place where all these things I'm talking about are not hard and unusual, but they become normal? They become normal as a part of our life. And when I think about the folks who were receiving this letter, those Jewish Christians that I talked about when we kicked off this series, these were people who had not grown in their new faith. They still believed that to please God meant to do works. They believed to do more religion would please him. And they really hadn't owned this idea of trusting in God and having faith in him and walking with him. Because to them, he was still a distant God who just expected a lot of things to be done. But the writer says, listen, you can't please God with works ultimately. Faith. You cannot be reconciled to God without faith. And for all of us, it's that same idea. Faith. Growing up in that. Moving along with that. Because there's so much more to be done in our lives than we can even imagine right now at this point. Let me just give you a warning. And I've certainly been at this place in my life. Just because we've been a Christian for many years does not mean that we are spiritually mature. Catch what I'm saying there? Just because we've been a Christian for a long time does not mean that we've grown up. It's kind of like the story about this person who was a teacher. She'd been teaching for 25 years. A promotion came up at her school. She applied for it. At the same time, somebody else applied who only had 2 years' experience. They took the one with 2 years' experience, and she got very upset. And she went to the principal, and she said, look, I've got 25 years of experience. How could you not take me? And the principal was like, well, actually, they had more experience than you. You see, you have really 1 year's experience that you simply repeated 25 times. You never really grew as a teacher. And this person in 2 years had actually done more than you had done in the 25. And I think about that in terms of our own Christian faith. We don't want to just get to the first phase, accept Christ, and then own that phase for the rest of our life and never grow beyond it. Paul talks about it like this. He says, you know what? When you're young, you need milk, right? As a baby. Spiritually, yes, we need milk. But at some point, we grow up. And there's no worse picture than a 25 or 35-year-old person still with a bottle stuck in their mouth. And we all know as parents raising kids, we give them the bottle, and then there's a point in the healthy life cycle that we take the bottle away, we introduce baby food, and then real food, and then that's how we grow up. That's the way it's supposed to go. And spiritually, it's the same thing. There is a point at which we need to grow up and move along. And really see God begin to do other amazing things in and through us. And oftentimes, I think that happens when we take a step. Sometimes we wait and say, God, grow me up. Bring the stuff, and I'll grow up when you do it. And he's going, take some steps, and I'll show you new faith. Like I can remember back when we started this church and when I first came over here, and I was like, when I arrived into town, I'm looking around and going, what am I the pastor of? I have no people, I have no building, I'm the pastor of an area, And so at first I was scared to death. And then finally we began to bring some people together, small group, try to develop a vision for this church, but then we had to make some decisions. And I just distinctly remember, and Randy Stevens, who was at the first service, who was a part of that original core team, we were talking about it, but we were trying to make a budget. We had so few people. And we had few people and few needs, but we had to come up with something. And so I can remember we kind of worked through a few things that we'd have to pay for. And so we came up with this random figure of $68,000. And it was funny because Randy was the first one to say, how is this little group of people going to make a $68,000 budget? And I said, I don't know, but I hope you do, And I said, we're just going to have to put this number out there and trust the Lord that he will work through us to make this happen. And it did. And then beyond that, we began to buy things to get ready for the first service. And we didn't know who was going to come or if anybody was going to come or if anybody would stay with us. And we agreed to meet in the skate center. And it was like, gosh, dog, is anybody going to come to a skate center to go to church? It's a disco ball. Come on. Who's going to do that? And people came. How are we going to build a building? How are we going to raise that kind of money? And we did. And for 14 years, it's been this constant process of Take a step in faith and watch God do his thing. Take another step and watch him do something else you couldn't believe. It's kind of like, have you ever wanted a sign from God? Come on, surely you've wanted a sign from God. God, just show me a sign, and I'll know where to go. And God's like, I tell you what, take a step and I'll show you a sign. Mark Batterson wrote this book called Wild Goose Chase. I don't know if you've read it. You should read it. It's a whole book about this whole idea of faith. But in there he says this. He says, in my experience, signs follow decisions. I cannot promise that signs will follow your faith in 3 minutes or 3 hours or 3 days. But when you take a step of faith, signs will follow. God will, here he goes, sanctify your expectations. You will begin to live your life with holy anticipation, and you won't be able to wait to see what God is going to do next. I believe that. And I believe that. It's easy to live our whole life without really taking steps. I think God's like, I'd love to see you take one, because that's the only way we're really going to walk together anyway, is with you taking steps. And I really think that what we've just talked about here is what it means to walk with God. This is not about having more religion, by the way. This is not about having a bigger checklist of things that you need to do, although doing is a part of our faith. But what we're talking about here is getting to know God and walk with him in a genuine way every day. He'll bring the fruit of that. But you got to start there. How's your walk? How's that going? I want to leave you with this from Matthew 11. These are Jesus' words. We'll read it out of the Message version. He says, are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Come to me. Get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely and lightly. I'm glad that's his invitation to us. Let's pray. God, this morning, we've all come here from different places in our life, so many things going on in our lives. Maybe we're worn out. Maybe we're tired or burned out on religion or burned out on life or burned out on relationships or I don't know what. But I'm glad that there is always an invitation to us, no matter where we are in our life, to come to you. That when we come to you, we find that our burden is not nearly what it was when we carried it by ourselves. That you come alongside us. That you help us learn to live this unforced rhythm of grace. And I just believe that every one of us in this place this morning wants to live that way. Whether we know it or not, we really want to live an unforced rhythm of grace with you. We want to walk in step with you. We want to know you and be shaped by you. Because the more we walk with the world, the more unsatisfying it is. The more pain there is. The more struggle with no end. So God, I'm praying that you would help every one of us to take good steps. First steps of faith. To go ahead and step out and then watch you work. To take a step towards you and watch you take a step toward us. God, we need that. Every one of us need that in our life. And I pray that we would all just simply lay it down. Just be courageous enough to let our life go. And stop struggling with it. So God, this morning, we just thank you that that's what you call us to. That's how much you love us. That's why you sent Christ to die on a cross so that we could enjoy that relationship. And I pray that we would know that as Enoch did with you. So God, we've come to this place this morning just to worship you, to say that we love you, to thank you for the way that you keep reaching out to us, and to simply praise you. And we offer this prayer this morning in the name of your Son, our Savior, Jesus Christ.